The integrated circuit is born. Home computers storm CES. And Atari orders massive chip inventories. These stories and many more on this episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
Makes him crazy, man. What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Welcome back to another episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine. On this episode, we'll look back at the biggest stories in and around the video game industry in March of 1961, 1971, and 1981. It's a big episode, kids. And as always, well, Peter, unfortunately, is still swamped by work, so we are once again joined by our very special guest host, John from the Retro Game Squad. John, glad to have you back.
It is very good to be back. I was so excited when I got your message saying, can you hop in? And I'm always here for you, man.
Awesome.
I'm really excited.
And we appreciate it because this is a big one. We got some really big stuff. This is not just a 40-year jump. We're doing a 60 and a 50-year jump as well. Never done this on the show. Never had this many jumps in one episode. So we'll see if the old time machine can hold it out or something.
I'm ready to fly through the years with you.
Awesome. Okay, well, in that case then, we do have a couple of things we've got to take care of first. And first off, remember everybody, when we're doing these time jumps, standard disclaimer, we're using magazine and newspaper cover dates. So obviously all the events happen at some point before that, but this is the way we organize things around here. So what do we start with? Well, as always, since 3 episodes ago, we're going to start with a little segment that we like to call 7 Minutes in Heaven. And that means that my co-host, in this case, John, you're going to get to play for the very first time a game that was reviewed in our 40-year jump, namely Asteroids Deluxe. Are you ready to rock and roll?
I believe so. Let's see how this goes.
Okay, off to the 7 Minutes in Heaven. Welcome back, John. Tell us about Asteroids Deluxe.
Oh, wow. I will tell you about Asteroids Deluxe. So this game is an arcade cabinet, too, because last time I played the Commodore 64 console release. This is an arcade. It's a 2D vectorized game where you are a literal triangle, aka spaceship, that looks really cool in vector, and you are moving around and shooting asteroids and dodging little UFOs that are made of lines. For anybody that isn't familiar with vectors, and I haven't played a vector-based game in a while, but I love them. Every character isn't made of these big square pixels. They're made of lines and points. So they're fairly simple for the time, but the gameplay is just, it's there, and it's really fun. I wish I could go back for more. I almost told you to hold off while I get another couple more quarters in so that I can keep playing. But it's a 2D plane. You're right in the center, smack dab in the center with your spaceship. You've got, I think, 4 shots that recharge when they leave the screen. I'm not sure how that's calculated. And
it's probably it can probably only handle 4 shot sprites at a time.
Right. And you've got these big asteroids, and you're trying to shoot them down. Every time you shoot it, they halve, and they get smaller and smaller. I think there's 3 tiers, and as you can imagine, once you start breaking them down into more, there are asteroids everywhere, and I lose quarters constantly. So, yeah, and it says 20 points for the big asteroids, 50 points for the medium ones, 100 points for the small ones, 200 points for the big UFOs, 1,000 points for the small UFOs. And it's like a cluster bomb almost. When you shoot it, a bunch of triangles come in. And
yeah, I don't know what they're calling it, but yeah, it's like an alien spaceship that breaks apart.
Oh, I didn't even put that together as a spaceship. Yeah, that's how primitive it is and how young I am. You have to bear with me. Yeah, so it looks like 50 points for the mothership, 20 or 100 points for the double, and then when you break those apart, there's little triangles that come at you that are 200 points. This one added a shield function. I was surprised by that. I got used to it pretty quickly. I noticed that when the little triangles are coming at you, if you pop your shield at just the right time, you don't have an infinite amount. So if you pop it at just the right time to give you the shield invincibility for a second, it will push you in such a way that you'll match the velocity of that triangle coming at you. And I was able to match myself up and knock him out. And I was getting through some levels.
Yeah,
still losing quarters, but getting through some levels. Yeah, this game's
you went through a lot of quarters there.
Yeah, I didn't eat lunch all week, just saving up those quarters.
Yeah, and Asteroids Deluxe, basically, it's the major difference with the original Asteroids was they were desperately trying to take out those players who had figured out how to lurk in the game, how to basically just hang out, exploit some of the game mechanics in order to really, really rack up high scores and get a bunch of extra lives and just play forever and ever. And, it was basically a way to make more money off of those hardcore players who had stopped spending a lot and just occupying the machines forever.
Yeah, I could see that. They definitely fixed that. We were also talking about did they upgrade the graphics or not the graphics, but I guess the cabinet styles? Because I guess when we were playing, I noticed that there was, or I guess I wanted to talk about it. There was like this really beautifully drawn background that had a green kind of tint to it, and then there was the white kind of shapy outline that kind of told you what's going on.
Yeah, there's the cabinet worked like a lot of cabinets back then for a variety of reasons. You had a flat piece of glass in the front that had graphics on it. They're black, they're white and red, describing the points values for the different ships and some of the game mechanics and so forth. Then the screen itself was laying flat in the cabinets looking upward. And what you were actually playing was a reflection off of a two-way mirror that was at a slight angle. On that two-way mirror, there was also the pictures of some asteroids, and then behind that was a curved piece of cardboard. And that curved piece of cardboard had additional painted asteroids and a spaceship, so that these different layers would give you a three-dimensional effect. So if you moved your head a little bit, the image on the mirror would actually not move at a parallax. You'd have a parallax effect between the mirror and the cardboard. And on top of that, the cardboard was illuminated with a black light, so that you also got, sort of a glowing effect in addition to the glowing effect that you would have had from the XY monitor in the machine.
Yeah, that green on that backdrop must look really cool under blacklight. I can totally see that, and that would only accentuate the depth difference. I guess for a point of reference, from someone who's never seen Asteroids Deluxe, but I've seen a Donkey Kong cabinet where there's kind of like a jungle outside, and that really just having that gives so much depth, and it sounds like using that differently oriented monitor and all that together would give a really cool effect.
Definitely
have to seek one of these out in person. Yeah.
Well, and it also, that weird angle basically also increases the size of the image slightly. So you're mirroring it, but you're doing it at this angle. So now you're actually getting a slightly bigger screen than you normally would, and especially at this time when large TV screens are still very hard to come by and very, very expensive. So it's a way of also increasing the size of the screen.
Yeah, I could see that. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely locating one of these someday. Maybe own one. We'll see.
Yeah, if you can find one, definitely worth throwing some quarters in. Just expect to have to throw in a lot of quarters because it's tough as nails.
Yeah, I've definitely set the momentum for that for myself. So I gotta go bug mom and dad for some more quarters before I go.
Exactly. Okay, now if you want to actually watch John play this, the video of his 7 Minutes in Heaven will be up on our Patreon for Patreon patrons. So go over there, chuck in a buck, help support the show, pay for our bandwidth costs, and watch John get his butt kicked in Asteroids Deluxe.
I came in with a Game Boy camera as well. I figured I'd rep the
This is true.
Retro Game Squad.
Yes, I should have mentioned this. You were the entire time while you were playing this capturing yourself on a Game Boy camera that was plugged into a physical Super Game Boy, and now you're going to have to follow the train because I lost it while you were explaining. How is that getting to a computer?
Yeah, you did good so far. Yeah, so a Game Boy camera, Super Game Boy, technically a Super Game Boy 2. I'll talk about that on one of our podcast episodes. But that cartridge, an original Super Nintendo, I have that running RGB to a open source scan converter. All you need to know is that converts it to HDMI, which goes to my HDMI capture card and shows up as a video device after all that long chain to Skype and the recording that we did. So I hope you guys enjoy that.
And it is really a thing of wonder that deserves. That's almost worth the price of admission, people. Come on.
There you go. The comment where, oh wow, you weren't kidding, pretty much sells it. When I mentioned it.
Yeah. Yeah, you were not kidding. Okay, so we're done with that segment, and before we can turn on the time machine, we have to do one more thing. We have to check in with Ethan of the history of how we play for a little segment we call the Department of Corrections. Welcome back to the Department of Corrections, Ethan. How did we screw up in February of 1981?
Well, I got my check boxes all here, and they're all checked out, so I'm going to have to rake you over the coals once more.
Oh, no. But we do something before you start raking me over the coals. Of course.
You have to give Peter his comment. So
no echo this time.
No. There's no point in simulating it. If I had a voice thing to just like trap my voice and then let it out of a jar or something.
Okay, yeah, that would be positive, I guess.
Yeah,
or something.
So something you definitely need to get for Peter one year for Christmas is a discovery system, because he seemed very enthralled with that.
I'm not quite sure how much of the enthrallment of the discovery system was genuine or just sarcasm, but yes, it would be a fun little present to get him at some point. I'd like to have one too. I'm sure it'll go for a lot of money on eBay.
That is probably correct. It's very interesting. If you follow me on the Twitter at GameResearch_E, I've been doing this thing called the MAG Project, where I've been going through, inspired by this podcast to a degree, of the early video game magazines. And one of my favorite sections is the electronic handheld section, or board games. It's this weird standalone video game stuff. And there's just some stuff on there that, one, nobody even has an eBay listing for, and two, is just so utterly bizarre that you don't understand why more people aren't looking for it.
Yeah, I mean, and it's weird because they sold it for several years. I mean, that thing was on the market for quite a while. I don't know why it just seems to be nowhere to be found. Maybe it was just because it was such a kid's product that no older people or older kids, teenagers or anything were interacting with it, and the kids basically just killed it. Or maybe there's some kind of defect in it that a lot of them didn't survive. Probably the LCD screens went the way of the dodo or something.
It's probably the demographic thing. People just don't have a huge interest in things that are considered toys unless they're in that realm. So the kind of crossover between electronic games, video games, toys kind of gets lost between the cracks. That's my assumption anyway. I'm not going to get into a sociological discovery over this right now. So let's get on to the actual corrections.
Okay.
First one up is you said that Sirotech changed its name to Surtech because it was Surtech. Like, that was kind of the implication that you put forward in the episode. But
Did I?
no,
Okay, yeah.
yeah, I mean, you were saying that it was because they were putting out Wizardry, they changed the name to Surtech. That's what I got from what you said. But no, the reason they changed the name, according to early profiles of Surtech, is that they were getting calls to their home address because under Sirotech, even though it was hyphenated, they were getting deluged with those kind of calls that they didn't want, so they abstracted the name, and it has tech in it. So that's why.
Makes sense, yes. And I kind of knew that it wasn't because of the wizardry thing, and I had a vague recollection of that they were getting calls or something, but you are correct. I think I played it off as a joke, but I probably didn't. So, yes.
Next one up is we are talking about Time Zone, the hilariously awful graphical text adventure game. You said that basically until King's Quest, there was no real fervor for graphical adventure games, but there was an industry that was still there. The sort of it's a text adventure and it has graphics layered on top of it. There was that other Sierra game that Roberta Williams worked on. Is it the black? Not the Black Cauldron. The Black Cauldron. Oh, the dark. Yeah, the Dark Crystal.
Black Cauldron was using the AGI engine already.
Yeah, and then there was Penguin Software, the games in this vein, and Penguin Software actually fairly important. I don't really fully understand why, but they made this very specific kind of graphical hardware that became extremely influential, and then the founder got to go shake hands with Obama in 2009 or something like that. And then, of course, there's Scott Adams, who shifted his Adventure International games fairly quickly over to the graphical Mystery House styles. Text adventure, it's an interesting thing that Mystery House comes before Zork. A lot of people don't remember that. So there was a diminishing level of interest in the static picture graphical text adventure, and then it revives when you get to King's Quest. But it's not that nobody made them, and
Well, did I say nobody made them, or just Sierra's high res adventures were dying after Time Zone? Because they only released one more high res adventure, which is Dark Crystal. After that,
I'm pretty sure that it was a general statement.
Oh, okay. Because, it just seems weird because I know that, for example, in Europe, they kept going for a long time. That's where you get Melbourne House. In Australia releases The Hobbit. And even into the early 90s, there was a Spanish developer called AD Adventures. They actually had an engine going for, at least until 94, 95, doing that kind of game. So this is why it would surprise me if I said it, but if I did say it, I did say it. So
yeah, that it is kind of interesting that a lot of the, the first commercial computer games that are often developed in other countries are text adventures, but then right after that, it's a graphical adventure with static pictures. Like I know Brazil, one of the earliest ones, is something like that. But that's a whole tangent. Maybe you'll get to touch on it someday.
Fingers crossed. I have a lead on an important guy from the Spanish game industry right now. Nice. I'm really, really hoping he bites because I've been dying to be able to tell that story. But oh well. Okay, let's move on.
Yes. Nasir Gabaldi. There is no D.
I've read too many Mario Puzo novels, probably.
Yes, and I checked this with my Iranian friend, so I can say that is not pronounced Gabelli. It is Nasir Gabelli. Gabelli is not an Iranian name. I don't really know where it comes from, but that's not how he says his name. Of course, most people call him Nasir, but that is not actually how you would pronounce it.
No, it's Nasir, isn't it?
Yes, Nasir. Yeah. Then after that, you were saying about how developers were anonymous in Japan, but actually there is in the case of Square, it was actually very different. Because one of the flyers or advertisements, I guess, for Final Fantasy actually had 3 people on the poster. Hironobu Sakaguchi, Nasir Gabelli, and Yoshitaka Amano. So people actually knew who was behind the games, and it had credits too. So,
wow, okay,
yeah, and the credits are at the beginning of the game. If you remember, you face the first boss, and then the credits roll, and then it goes into the rest of the game.
I have to admit, I've never played the NES version of FF1, but I did play it through in the Game Boy Advance re-release. So the updated version. So
it surprised me if they changed that, but
they probably didn't. It's probably still there. I just honestly couldn't remember.
Yeah.
So it's been a few years since I played through that one.
And also, you said he was brought on to do Final Fantasy, but he was actually working at Square for a couple of years before then.
Oh, really? That I didn't know. Okay.
Yeah, he did 3D World Runner, Ridge Racer.
Oh, wow.
And I think one of their computer games as well. At least one.
Okay. So they were using him for all the really tricky stuff on the 6502 then.
Yes, that is a whole story in itself, which is told in the book Software People by Doug Carlston.
Yes, I'm actually still trying to get through that book. I haven't finished yet. I know. I'm a bad history man. Bad history man.
Yeah, so he was a whiz, and because there had been some profiles of him in the American magazines, Sakaguchi knew who he was. Sakaguchi is the one who sought him out, to my understanding.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Okay. Anything else that I messed up in February of 1981?
We shall leave it where it is for them.
Yes. Excellent. Well, in that case, then, thank you, Ethan, for your public service and keeping us honest here. And I guess we'll see you on our next time jump.
Bye-bye.
Wow. Okay. As always, that was rough. So, John, I think it's time for us to turn on the time machine, set it to 60 years ago, and let's head back to March of 1961. And we don't have a sound effect for this, so.
Yeah, I was waiting for the cue.
Woo, 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 or something.
Yeah.
Welcome to March of 1961. The swinging 60s haven't really started yet, but hey, we still got those cool 50s hats. So, John, what's our first headline?
Fairchild introduces the IC.
A new dawn is upon the world as Fairchild has announced the first of 6, quote, molecular electronic components, end quote, which will revolutionize the computer industry. This is actually the birth of the integrated circuit, which will allow for the replacement of the older transistor-based computers that IBM has been selling to the microchip-based machines of the future.
Ooh. So you mean we won't have computers that are the size of rooms anymore?
Exactly. This is where it really starts. This is the birth.
Yeah, that's an exciting year.
Yeah. I mean, and it's basically, it's just a tiny little article in the New York Times. Obviously, remember everybody, everything we talk about links in the show notes below. And just the way they tried to explain it, the molecular electronic components, is just kind of kick-ass.
Yeah, it's a very dramatic sell for something, but it is a huge thing, even though it's very small in the grand scheme of things, but it's very huge for where we are today.
Exactly. I mean, this is where it's all going to start. So yeah, pretty kick-ass. So the birth of the integrated circuit, not directly video game related, but let's say it's sort of a prerequisite for the video game as we know it today.
Absolutely, paving the way. I don't know if you've seen that picture going around the internet, that black and white picture of them. It was like a couple of megs. It wasn't a whole lot of them pushing it into the side of a building on a big.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. That's just like, we have a computer the size of a quarter now.
Yeah, basically. And I have a distant cousin. He was a computer programmer during the East German days, the days of GDR. And he still has this sort of cubic mesh of copper wires that used to be used as a memory cell in his office. And it's pretty badass. Yeah. So, and we've talked about this on the show before. I mean, a few months back, we talked about how the first RAM chips were replacing the old copper wire memory systems that they had been using since the 50s and stuff. So, but the integrated circuit, I mean, everything, the RAM that comes out of this, the CPUs that come out of this, everything as we know it today in computing is born at this moment.
Very cool. Very, very cool.
Yeah. But, okay, it's not the only story from 60 years ago.
It is not. The libraries of the year 2000 will be on computer tape.
This bold prediction is made by John G. Kameny, and I'm probably massacring the pronunciation on that one, the chairman of the mathematics department at Dartmouth College. At a conference at MIT, he described a system that would allow remote access to books recorded on computer tape through local computer terminals. This system would cost less than $1 billion and be implementable in under 20 years. A later computer-aided system for searching through the mass of information would also be implemented. This would alleviate the problem of ever-increasing library collections, which would soon become untenable. Kameny, I'm probably killing it, like I said, who had worked on the Manhattan Project, had been a math assistant for Albert Einstein and would go on to be the co-developer of the basic computer language with Thomas E. Kurtz in 1964. And he was also a pioneer of computer literacy education, which he promoted strongly during his time as the president of Dartmouth from 1970 through 1981.
This is definitely another foundational article here for where we are now. If he called it, but if he had known
Exactly.
at that time, yeah.
Exactly. I mean, the idea of seeing how these individual components would work together, or what, the basic idea of computer storage and retrieval could do on a large scale, and the idea that he wants to implement it to solve the problem of libraries are too full is pretty kick-ass in my opinion, because it's just, how do we use this for the most practical purpose to disseminate information? It was an interesting idea, interesting setup. The fact that this is being carried in the New York Times in 1961 is also pretty cool. Just, the idea is in the air that, hey, these computer things are going to do something.
Mm-hmm. And that would lead on to the immense amount of efforts these days to preserve computer gaming and video gaming.
Exactly. I mean, all the databases that we rely on, archive.org, for example, is just another expansion of this, because he's still thinking, well, how do we preserve the physical books? Well, nowadays the question is, how do we preserve all the stuff that we've created digitally?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's a very interesting article. And the guy himself, I did not know he was one of the co-creators of BASIC. It really had never dawned on me. Oh, wait, the BASIC language has to have creators. And I started going down this rabbit hole with it. So in a few years, when we get to the anniversary of that, definitely going to have to do a bit of a deeper dive on him and the birth of the BASIC project. Again, to any of the historians listening, if anybody has done the research on this, hit me up and we'll put you on the schedule for a special ep at some point. So, okay, but I think that's it for our 60-year jump. Let's turn on the time machine and head back to March of 1971. And no, we don't have a sound effect for this one either. So let's, it's too early for disco. What would have been 71? Some anti-war song. Yeah, anti-war song inserted here. Welcome to March of 1971. John, what's our first story?
Film editing goes non-linear thanks to computers.
Not directly game-related, but hugely influential and important for the future of film, CMX Systems has introduced the world's first non-linear video editing system, the Rave. This system allows an editor to work with up to 30 minutes of film stored in black and white skip field format on massive washing machine-sized pile of storage units using a light pen and coordinated by a DEC PDP-11. Future systems would use VCRs, Laserdiscs, and other media formats.
Wow, that's interesting that they're using a light pen for that implementation. That's way ahead of its time.
It is. I mean, and I couldn't find any good images of what the display would look like. I want to think that it's, sort of a proto-GUI interface if they're using a light pen. That's the thing that would make the most sense. It's also possible that the display is just showing multiple frames at the same time or multiple paths through the takes. So let's say if you have 5 different takes of the same scene that you're using the light pen to switch between the different takes. But I honestly do not know how the light pen functioned in this particular system. I couldn't find that, unfortunately. And if anybody does have a link to that, please send it to us at Video Game Newsroom Time Machine at gmail.com, or leave us a like or a comment on YouTube. So that but it does also, these systems do contribute a lot to the technology of scanning imagery, storing imagery, and are also going to help along in what we use for video games. I mean, FMV sequences and so forth. All that video editing technology is going to contribute to gaming technology ultimately in some form or fashion.
Yeah, that's incredible. It really is. We've come a long way from microfiche.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I mean, and obviously this is still black and white. It's skip field, so you're only getting, I think it's every second or maybe even every fourth scan line or something, because the storage is just way too precious, but still. So it's pretty badass. Yeah. And sticking with movies,
George Lucas makes his feature film debut with THX 1138.
Oh, yes. The feature film version of Lucas's student short film has hit theaters and, according to the New York Times, is a bleak vision of the future that is suspenseful and harrowing, but also seems outdated. A world where everyone is drugged up all the time to calm their anxieties and monotonously goes about their day with little more to look forward to than blind consumption? Nah, totally an angst of the past.
This is a weird one, both the movie and that review there, because it's Yeah, because it started out as a short film, and then and then this is his first directorial debut, and I've watched it recently. It's definitely out there.
Oh yeah, it is. It is a very trippy movie in many regards. Uh, great acting from Duvall in it.
Mm-hmm.
This is all obviously pre-Godfather, but yeah, the idea in 1971 that we would revert back to the blind consumerism of the 1950s and conformism of the 1950s after just having gone through the enlightened 1960s is, yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too deeply into the social commentary, but yeah, this is, it's kind of funny how they're reacting to this movie.
Yeah, for sure. And this is pre-Star Wars too. Having seen it with the perspective of having seen Star Wars as a piece of art that Lucas created, there's a lot of similarities, but the people writing this article didn't know this at the time. So it's just a crazy blind take of this movie being released.
Oh yeah, definitely. The idea that Lucas was going to be huge, he already had some buzz around him going into this movie, and that is kind of apparent in the reviews for the movie. But yeah, of course, what would become his magnum opus is nobody can even picture that or imagine that at this point.
I read that he filmed the short film that this was based off of, with access to Naval Academy locations, which was something that didn't normally happen, but they were bankrolling to allow Navy university students to come study where he was studying. And a lot of them appear in his original cut, although he didn't make them shave their heads for the role. But I thought that was very interesting to give him a way of standing out, to have access to certain places that maybe a normal student student director wouldn't have access to.
That's a cool story. I haven't heard that one, but it does make sense because I have seen the short film. So yeah, no, that is pretty cool. And obviously it just adds tons to the atmosphere. Especially given the world that they're trying to portray. So being able to get access to the scope and the type of facilities to get that atmosphere, hugely beneficial.
Yeah, very sterile and basic environments.
Exactly.
That's a cool footnote.
Oh no, definitely a super cool one. And I mean, it's sometimes these little coincidences, these little strokes of luck that will set people on very different paths. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of one of the interesting things about doing these time jumps, where you can just sort of see something in the context of that moment and see what else is going on. I mean, he's talking here about, consumerism and technology driving people's lives. And at the same time, in Hollywood, they're using technology to basically do the editing of the movies for the first time. Mm-hmm. So it's, I think it may have been in the air in Hollywood. The machines are coming, so to speak. But, and the fact that on the outside, everybody's like, oh, we're never going to go back to that. We have the age of Aquarius or something.
It was certainly that time, wasn't it?
It definitely was. Okay. So we're done with our extraordinary jumps to 61 and 71. Let's get back to our regularly scheduled program and turn back the clock to March of 1981.
Rapidly becoming an international craze. 1981.
This is only the first step in newspapers by computer.
Right in the midst of it, thank you.
Okay. Welcome to March of 1981. John, what's our first story?
Electronic toys disappoint at CES. but video games come out swinging.
Toy retailers and distributors have left the Winter Consumer Electronics Show a bit disappointed by the meager showing of new, exciting electronic game product. Many hope that Toy Fair will bring the goods for Christmas 1981. Video games, on the other hand, are stealing the show, and for some, it is clear that the consumer dollar will be divided up between Atari and Mattel.
Ooh, this is a prime year for Atari.
Oh, yes. We're not done with Atari news just yet. There's going to be another story a little bit later that's going to play into this. But yeah, this is the VCS is coming into its own. Space Invaders was launched for Christmas. That's basically the game that solidifies you've got to have a VCS at home. And now Mattel is really the only real contender to fight them off with the Intellivision. You have a few other systems still hovering out there, but it's these two guys that are going to go mano a mano.
Right. Yeah, you couldn't go wrong opening one of those for Christmas.
No, definitely not. No. But at the same time, so while the toy people are, like, oh man, we're missing, will they do something with the little handheld electronic games? Because those have a price point that we feel comfortable with in the toy industry. Because video games are still super, super expensive items at this point. Or do we have to start, getting into these expensive cartridges and expensive systems? And that's why going into CES, they were kind of hoping to see more new handheld electronics that weren't showing up. So that market is having a big shakeout at this point, just because everybody jumped in Christmas of '79. A lot of products basically either didn't ship or companies just started to disappear because there were too many Me Too products on the market in '80. So going into '81, it's going to be far fewer manufacturers, far fewer products. But it's people are now graduating up to video games from the handheld electronics.
That's exciting. Yeah, it's weird getting a view of what CES was like during these years. I guess that's something that I don't really think about outside of looking at these headlines, because CES has changed massively since then. Oh, definitely. I mean, it's the whole idea of an electronic show for the consumers, where people are buying, or I should say, just to clarify for those, we've talked about a few times on the show, but it's always worth repeating. At this point, we have two CESs. We have a winter CES that's held in January, and then a summer CES. And the winter CES is basically everybody's coming out of Christmas. Everybody knows what sold well, what didn't sell well. And the winter CES is where the companies are basically floating ideas to the retailers. And remember, this is not a show open to the public. This is press and industry only. Mm-hmm. So the manufacturers are trying to sort of present prototypes and stuff to the retailer and say, ooh, do you guys think this would be cool? Ooh, do you think this would be cool? And while there's some ordering of product happening at the show, the main idea here is test the waters, get a feel for what people think is cool and isn't, to figure out, okay, are we going to take this prototype and develop it further, and then at summer CES show the final product so we can take orders for Christmas. And so winter CES is where we're going to see sort of the first wave of fallout from the Christmas season. Yeah, it's crazy to think it's not just the consumer or the people in the consumer space looking at these electronics, but it's the guys who have their new thing and want to see how it tests in a live situation.
Exactly. Well, and it's also the retailers. I mean, think about it. If a retailer buys a bunch of this product, yes, some of it they might be able to return. If the company goes broke, they can't return any of it.
True.
There's some real risks going on. I mean, when we get to the crash in '83, that's really going to be the big problem. That the toy manufacturers all think, well, okay, these cartridges didn't sell. I'm just going to return them. And it turns out the game makers were these fly-by-night companies, or they were big companies that just sold so much they can't afford to take that hit.
Right.
So a lot of the game developers just disappear. Well, you can't return something for a refund to a company that's gone bankrupt.
Exactly.
Yeah. So there's a lot of that kind of speculation. I mean, for a lot of retailers, every Christmas is make or break. If you get the mix of product in your store wrong, if you invest in the toy that wasn't hot, basically you might as well just shutter your store because you're not going to survive until next Christmas.
Yeah, very cutthroat and high risk, high reward at that point.
Exactly. So this is why the CESs are important, and it's also important which product is going to impress and which one won't, because if you can't get it at retail in the 1980s, you just can't get it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But we're not done with CES. Now, that was the toy industry's perspective. Let's see what the computer industry's perspective was.
Microcomputers take the stage at CES.
The Winter CES was an opportunity for microcomputer makers to close deals with retailers for their maturing lines of machines. But it's also a time of shakeouts. The crowded field seems to be thinning, with various anticipated machines or manufacturers failing to appear. Among them Sharp, who did not show their MZ80, which they have already launched in England. Apple didn't bother with a booth, apparently opting to concentrate on the business market. So, got a whole bunch of entries here for Winter CES, so probably best to do a little bit of discussion in between them. So Sharp, obviously an important international electronics manufacturer, they had launched this computer, the MZ80, running a Zilog 80 chip in it in Japan, I believe all the way back in 78 already, 78 or 79. And then they had launched it also in England, not really successfully, and people had thought they were going to see a display of it at CES, and at this point, as far as I can tell, they never actually launched it in North America. The machine just kind of, petered out at that point.
I didn't realize it was that established that many years ago. I knew it was around this time, but that's interesting to think about because because the U.S. that this is focused on is the third stop for all this.
Well, for this particular one, yeah, and the world at this point, as far as microcomputers, I mean, you've got the Trinity released in '77. Those are the three big U.S. computers: the Trash 80, the Apple II, and the Commodore PET. And those get exported to Europe, and those get exported to Japan with more or less success. With pockets of the machines gaining popularity in different places. So you got Commodore is huge in Germany. In England, the TRS-80 actually gained some traction. In Japan, the Apple II has quite a bit of success, but I think there's also a lot of Commodore PET going on over there. And now, a couple years on, the Japanese are starting to make computers. Remember, they have a whole different set of problems to deal with in Japan because of the language. So you need to have much higher resolutions on your screen in order to display kanji than you need for Greek letters. You need to have different types of memory RAM to display those higher resolutions and stuff, you also need to figure out a very different set of ROMs for the computer to be able to store all of those kanji in ROM, which is also extremely expensive. You have barriers to entry for a non-English speaker of using an imported machine at this time. And in Europe, obviously, you've got a whole bunch of small countries. You've got regulations for the use of the machines that differ from country to country. You've got import-export issues from country to country. And the language barrier is also different. I mean, you can't just bring a U.S. computer over and sell it in France because the keyboard layout's different. There are symbols that are missing, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of issues here about the adoption of machines that are not customized. And we can't forget, these are still relatively small. It's a small industry. These are relatively small companies that don't always have the ability to create customized product for every single territory that they want to sell in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wouldn't say the market was super big until the later 80s, like a few years in the future from where we're talking about now when they're introducing a lot of this.
Well, we're about to see a massive explosion, at least in the U.S., of the purchase of these machines.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be part of one of the a few more headlines down. That is coming. It's on the brink. There's going to be a giant upswing in the next 2 years, and there's also going to be a bit of a bursting of that bubble to the point where you're going to see a serious downturn of sales of home computers in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
Not directly related to, but caused by many of the same factors as the bursting of the console bubble. So, and it's basically just, these computers are going to get very popular, but at this point, they really can't do a whole hell of a lot. And so once you have the computer at home and you realize, you can program BASIC on it, but there's only a handful of online systems, database systems that would really make the computer useful for acquiring information, but they're so expensive, so hard to come by, and so few people figure out how to use them that they're not really drivers of the mass market. And the main use for most of these machines becomes playing games. And okay, kid's got a game machine. Well, now he's going to have to enjoy it for the next 5 years or something. So there's issues happening there with the distribution of new machines. But again, those are stories for a few more years down the pipeline.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So stick around, kids. Lots of fun yet to come. Okay. Let's move on from machines that didn't show up to the move from video game consoles to computers hasn't stopped with Atari, since they have their Atari 8-bit line at this point. APF, makers of the Imagination Machine, are touting the latest version of their machine, the Imagination Machine 2, which does away with the console plus computer add-on setup of the original and is a self-contained system. As far as I can tell, it never shipped. So, John, do you know what the Imagination Machine was?
I do not.
Oh, okay.
I wonder
so
why.
This was, and we've talked about it on the show before. I'll put a link to the original episode where it was first introduced like a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. So there was this idea at the time that game consoles were simply a transitory product. They were a transitional step on the way to home computers, that everything was going to become a home computer. There was no reason in having a CPU and RAM combination piece of hardware in your home that you also couldn't program BASIC on to make your own programs. So a lot of the companies that had started off making Pong clones, so the little Pong home system clones, tried to also get into the home computer market. There's tons of little computers coming out here and there, blah, blah, blah. And so what APF, that one of these companies that made a Pong clone earlier or in the late 70s, they now created this system that was a game console, a very weak game console, but it clicked into a larger housing that had a keyboard, and now you could store your programs on cassette tapes, and it was basically trying to have the computer piggyback on things like the video out of the game console in order to partially save money, partially, get all the features into one thing. So you would have separate hardware for the games and separate hardware for the computer, so you wouldn't have to have a general purpose machine that would be half-assed on each of the two things. And it ended up being, just a system that couldn't really do jack. It lacked all memory, wasn't as powerful as the VCS. As a computer, it really, really failed, and the coordination of the hardware between the two systems never really materialized. So if you were programming on it, you were really only programming with the computer component hardware, not with the console hardware.
Wow. Talk about swinging too hard before you hit the gates and not even making it there.
Exactly. Now, I mean, I have read some stuff. There was some innovative hardware, technical stuff about the machine, but the reviews that I read about it when it came out, it was simply, there was so little RAM, and I can't remember how much it was. It may have been like 2K or something.
Oh, wow.
It was so little RAM that you really couldn't do anything productive with the system. And that was its Achilles heel. The Imagination Machine 2 was basically going to keep the hardware the same, as far as I can tell, and just integrate it into one body. But, I mean, that's not really solving the problem. That's just a cost-cutting measure for the manufacturer.
Right. That's totally missing the note on the strength of the system and doing something completely different. That's unfortunate. It sounds so cool on paper. I was like, come on, let's go. And then you're like, oh, wait, this thing never released. Oops.
Yeah. Well, and this is why. I mean, you go to the Winter CES to show off your prototypes and stuff and gauge, does it pay off for us to invest another 30, 40,000 or whatever in R&D to get this ready for the summer CES? And apparently...
Or throw in the towel.
And then we're just throwing in the towel. There's winter CESs are littered with the bodies of prototypes that never went anywhere. I mean, and dear readers, if you go back to, I believe it was our March or February episode of last year, where we talked about the last winter CES, there were a ton of handheld games and stuff that just never made it to market because companies were like, this market's dying. We need to move into video games and stuff. So a lot of the product we talked about didn't materialize for Christmas, was shown at the previous winter CES. So, but let's move on to another company of note. Bally has teamed up with Astrovision to release the Astrovision computer add-on for the existing Bally Arcade. The Astrovision add-on ships with the powerful ZGrass programming language, unlike most systems that ship with BASIC. But BASIC is already available on the Bally Arcade, but that doesn't have a full keyboard, making writing programs with it very cumbersome. Okay, I know that probably just sounded all Greek, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to still wrap my mind around ZGrass.
Oh, ZGrass was this programming language that was actually designed for doing graphics. As far as graphics existed back then with the very low resolutions and everything. But unlike BASIC, which had originally been designed for mainframe use and didn't inherently have functions for graphics, It was basically, supposed to be doing things that, processed information.
Right.
ZGrass was a programming language specifically designed for the purpose of doing graphics.
I gotcha. And they mentioned it doesn't have a full keyboard. That's interesting. I didn't.
Oh, the Bally Arcade? Well, the Bally Arcade is an interesting device. And there's links to it in the show notes, but basically it was a console. It was a game console, and it was an attempt by Bally, the coin-op company, to get into this home business, and it had an alphanumeric pad, so you were putting in the basic commands, and I'm probably getting it slightly wrong, but think about a primitive version of texting on a flip phone.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was surprised to see Bally come up as a name in the article too, because you definitely, I think of them as making pinball machines and that sort of thing. But it makes sense they'd want to get their hat in the ring. Yeah,
exactly. And this Astrovision system was originally supposed to be its own thing. It's a different company, and the two have now united. And it's again going to be one of those problems where integrating the two pieces of hardware, they don't really fit together. And so putting them together isn't really getting you that much of an advantage.
I see.
Yeah. But the Bally Arcade has been around for a while. And yeah, it's going to continue to be there for a few more years. It's actually a really cool little console, can do a lot of stuff. I mean, I don't know all the specs, but I think you could put it on par with the 2600, given what the base unit could do, not counting, what you could do if you started adding features to the cartridges. But and it's going to keep selling in various forms. I think another company or two other companies take it over at some point, and they're selling it mail order and all sorts of stuff. But it survives for a few more years on the market.
Very cool.
Yeah. And let's check in with another classic company. Mattel showed off the keyboard component for the Intellivision again. This is the fourth CES in a row where the unit was shown, but production and distribution are still nowhere to be seen.
Yikes.
Well, have you ever heard the tales of the Intellivision keyboard component?
No, I have not. This is unfortunately new to me.
Oh, okay. Well, you're seeing a pattern here, right? Uh-huh. The Intellivision's a game console, and when they originally advertised it, they were like, yeah, you can buy the console, but you know what? We will release a full-blown computer add-on for it so you can also program. So this is your gateway to having a home computer so that little Johnny and little Mary can learn how to program. And because everybody in the future is going to need to know how to program in order to survive and have a job. Otherwise, they're going to be ditch diggers. And yeah, this system notoriously, and we've talked about it on the show many, many times because it just keeps coming up. It's the Duke Nukem Forever of its day. It does finally ship only after there's a threat of a lawsuit, and because of all the people who bought it thinking, I'm only buying this because I can turn it into a computer. And if you listen to the first half of my interview with Don Daglow, he was actually one of the original or early programmers at Mattel, designing software for the add-on, and then had to shift over to not doing software for the add-on because the add-on wasn't going to come. And they then did release it in limited quantities in only a handful of test markets, or one test market, basically just to be able to claim that they did try to sell it. And then they sold some more units over mail order. But that's going to be still a few years out. I think 1 or 2 years out from this point, and by then it doesn't matter anymore anyway. So,
Yeah, just kind of wait for interest to wane off and become obsolete.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have the crash in between and all sorts of other stuff. It's messy. It's messy. And again, it's another one of these idiot moves where the Intellivision was actually running off of a 16-bit processor. Not a super powerful one, but it's a 16-bit processor. And they're going to put a non-compatible 8-bit processor in the computer unit that does not communicate with the 16-bit processor in the Intellivision. It's the same nonsense idea in every single one of these devices. But yeah,
that's just wild.
Yeah. It's crazy. Oh well. Now let's go to the big 800-pound gorilla of the console market. Atari has slashed the prices of their computers from $630 down to $500 for the Atari 400. They are coupling this with graphically impressive in-house software like home ports of arcade hits Missile Command and Asteroids, as well as original titles like Chris Crawford's Scram.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's $630 and $500 $1981.
Yeah, so that's a lot of the inflation converters would say do about a 4-to-1 transfer.
Oh, okay.
I always think that's a little not 100% accurate, but it does speak volumes. So it's probably more like 3-to-1, but you can't really compare these things 1-to-1, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so this is still a very expensive piece of hardware, but it's a major cost reduction.
Yeah, especially for the power that they're putting out here now, and of course they can show off the latest and greatest of their games with this announcement too. That's really cool for them.
Yeah, well, and this also shows one of the ideas with Atari. Atari is piggybacking. They saw it with the 2600 where Space Invaders was king. And they're starting to realize, okay, we've got either our own arcade hits or we have enough clout to license arcade hits from other companies. And again, here I'll point to my interview with Michael Katz, who and a few of my other interviews where, getting the licenses to big arcade hits is like a license to print money on the consoles at this point, because
Right.
Everybody is looking at the arcade as, that is what gaming is. And we also see here that Atari's using some of their in-house talent, and Chris Crawford is the famous co-founder. We've had this issue, Ethan, I know. Co-founder of GDC. And he is an Atari 8-bit computer evangelist at this point. We've talked about it, I think, last month or 2 months ago, where we talked about his an article he wrote trying to explain hardware sprites in a magazine, because no home computer had hardware sprites before. And the Atari 8-bits were the first ones. So trying to explain that concept to programmers, and this is still an era when most people buy the computer not because they want to run some program that they're going to buy in the store. It's because you're going to write your own program for your specific purposes.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea that you can now, hardware sprites and moving graphics around, holy crap, this is an option. And you're starting to get games like Scram, which are not arcade games. There's more strategy elements coming in, and that's going to be this trend, this split between what is expected of a computer game and what is expected of a console/arcade game. That rift is going to start, and we see it here. Even though Atari is using the arcade games as a reason to buy the home computer.
That's good on them to be able to, sell their initial arcade their arcade versions of these games, and also provide in-home experiences that you couldn't have at the arcade just because you'd be sitting there for hours.
Exactly. So they're really putting money into software development. Now, remember, software development is not cheap because you have to be constantly putting out new games. It's an expensive option, especially because, I mean, you design the hardware once. Yeah, you'll have a design team that's, cost reducing for each new iteration of the hardware, but it's not as cost intensive as, for example, software development. There's another strategy, though, that one could take with this. And that brings us to Commodore. And so the price cut is coming just in time as Commodore's VIC-20 is storming the gates at just $299.95. The goal is to penetrate the mass market. To that end, they are encouraging outside development of software to be published through Commodore or independently, and they have commissioned manuals for the system to be written at a much lower level than traditional computer manuals.
Wow. Yeah, hot on the heels of what Atari's doing too. Two different approaches.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very clear. Jack Tramiel, the founder of Commodore and the guy running the show at this point, he clearly sees the issue of price as key to breaking into the mass market. And so Atari, I don't know how much of Atari's decision to cut the cost was because of the VIC-20 coming, or it was just a natural progression. We introduced the machine. Now we figured out ways to cut the cost. We've gotten into mass production. We can do it. But the price wars are starting now. There is going to be a price war in the computer business. And Jack is watching everything, and this is an important factor as well. Commodore is big in Europe. They have a strong presence, especially in Germany. But they know what's going on the continent. Atari is a little bit less so. And also this idea of shipping the computer with these super detailed manuals that really explain everything about the system is something that Commodore does. The VIC-20 manual is legendary amongst hobbyists. It's basically a learn all about computers course in a book handed to you when you bought the machine. And the other companies are not doing this. This is why, for example, Chris Crawford has to explain how the hardware sprites on the Atari 2600 work in a magazine article, because the documentation sure as hell ain't going to tell you how it works.
Right.
But Atari has a vested interest because Atari is also making money off the software that they're producing.
Sure. And if they can co-publish with someone who wants to put their stuff out, that's even more money.
Exactly. And Commodore is just like, you know what? Do whatever you want. Write your own code. We don't care. Because we know people are going to buy the machine with the most software, and if everybody's creating software for us, all the better.
Yeah, it's different when I know about the VIC-20 versus some of these other platforms where I'm hearing about some of them for the first time.
Yeah, and the VIC-20 is going to be the first one to hit 1 million units in sales.
Interesting.
I mean, the Apple II's been around from 1977. It's not going to hit that number for a very long time.
Right.
And the Commodore VIC-20 is going to do it, I believe, within a year and a half, maybe 2 years.
That's wild.
Yeah. The VIC-20 is going to hit like a bomb. It's going to be huge. It's not all that well remembered today, because it gets replaced by a machine that looks almost identical. It's in the same exact case with a slightly different color. And then that's the Commodore 64, which is coming in 1982.
Oh, okay.
But the VIC-20 is the one that establishes all the basic tenets of that will lead to the success of the 64. And Yeah, and so Jack is going full hog. We're not making software, or we're going to make only very, very little software, but we're going to let everybody else make the software for us. And speaking of what's going on the continent, Sinclair won't be undersold by Commodore with the $200 ZX80. It has only 1K of memory as opposed to the VIC-20's 5, but it will now have a $100 16K memory upgrade available for it. And again, probably need an explanation. Do you know who Sinclair is?
I do.
Yes.
Probably want to. You should probably lay it out for people who don't. I don't know I know of that, but I don't know too much about it. Yeah.
Sinclair is Sir Clive Sinclair at this point. He's not a sir yet.
Uh-huh.
And he is a electronics producer out of England. Again, put a link in the show notes. They Create Worlds, the Game History podcast, did a wonderful breakdown of the history of the Sinclair companies. And so he is now getting into the computer business. Now, he's famous for creating kits. That was his original thing. So you'd buy the components and put them together yourself, and he was never big on quality control or anything like that. And the ZX80 is going to be this tiny little computer, weighs almost nothing. Literally, it's grams. And it's going to have a membrane keyboard. So it's just one flat piece of plastic in the front, and you have to press down fairly hard to make each key work. But it plugs into your TV, and it's a full-blown computer, and you can then plug in any standard cassette deck to load and store your programs. And you can even buy it in England, not in the US, but in England you can buy it as a kit. So you can just buy the components and then do some soldering and put it together yourself. And so it's the first of 3 big computers his company will release, the ZX80. I believe the next year he already releases the ZX81. And then finally he releases the ZX Spectrum, which is the famous home computer / gaming machine that really takes England by storm.
Yeah, that's how I know about Sinclair, through that.
Yeah, exactly. But this is where it starts. This computer doesn't have any graphics yet. It's just black and white, essentially ASCII characters. But it can already do quite a bit, and the ZX81 is going to really be the starting point. There's a lot of famous programmers and stuff that get their start with the ZX81 because at this point, England is a very economically distressed country, and this super cheap little computer in a country that has been going through wave after wave of layoffs and mass unemployment through the shutting down of old industry is going to turn to computers as sort of their future. And people buying these cheap little computers are going to be one of those attempts to get out of the poverty cycle.
Yeah, the selling kits like that is incredible, especially for that kind of exposure at the time, because you weren't just buying this box, you could buy a kit and get hands-on with the hardware level. Like that's not even something you see too much these days.
Exactly. I mean, how many people even put just the cards in their computer, let alone solder something together? Nobody does it. And I mean, nowadays it would also be a lot more difficult. The parts are way too big and stuff. But, you know, this is coming out of that tradition of people buying kits to put stuff together. And again, we've talked about on the show before, things like companies like Heathkit that were very big in this. Popular Electronics is still a publication at this point. And it's all about, you know, making your own electronic circuits and stuff. But slowly all of that is dying due to the integrated circuit. There's no room left for it. I mean, anything that you can solder together yourself is kind of pointless because you can probably buy for a couple of bucks a super small compact version of the same thing, pre-manufactured.
Yeah, I wish I was around for for that era of things, because I definitely came in a lot later when, yeah, it was pretty much just everything's way too small to to deal with.
Yeah. I mean, I still remember as a kid, I had this great game called Rocky's Boots, and it was an educational title designed to teach kids how to read circuit layouts and how to build circuits to do certain things. So I used the circuit symbols, and it was sort of like a GUI system where you moved a cursor around, you grabbed different elements, and you had to puzzle them together to build circuits that kind of looked and worked like Rube Goldberg machines. It was really cool. Oh yeah, no, I highly recommend finding a copy of the game. It's totally, I mean, it's a great puzzle game as well as a great educational tool.
That's neat. Yeah, it's funny how that's kind of, I don't want to get too far ahead of where we are now, but I mean, literally like what, almost 40 years ahead of time. But now there's a focus on teaching programming like that too. You're guiding little cats around these Rube Goldberg puzzles to teach the basics of programming. So it's funny how, as advanced we are, we're still seeing the cyclical nature of teaching kids this sort of stuff.
And you have to teach the basics at a certain point. I mean, the high-level languages are only going to get you so far in the understanding of what the machine can do, and sooner or later, you know, people still need to know what's going on that basic level. So it's, yeah, I mean, you need that very basic knowledge. Well, but we're not done with the companies vying for the home market yet. Like I said, CES, lots going on. Texas Instruments isn't going to go quietly into that dark night with their TI 99/4, though, as they are targeting the mainstream by unveiling their newest spokesman, Bill, America's then dad and today's sexual pariah, Cosby. They are also promoting third-party software development as well as advertising TextNet, an online service run in partnership with the Source Telecomputing.
That has not aged well. It's interesting seeing Texas Instruments in this list too. I guess because the TI 99. Wow, that's I mean, because my exposure is the little calculator I had to have for like math class way back when, but this was a big deal in computing for that time.
Oh, they were huge, and they weren't just, they had gotten now into the computer business. They had obviously also gotten into the calculator business. But these guys are also making chips. The TI 99 is using a graphic chip that would also then later get reused in the MSX line of computers in Japan.
MSX was
years.
Big.
Oh, huge. Absolutely huge.
Yeah, good for them.
Yeah. So, I mean, TI is still a major player even after the TI 99 dies, and it will die in relatively short order. Again, the reviews for that machine when it came out the year earlier were not spectacular. There's some serious design issues, and it also fell prey to the 1979 FCC changes. Again, everybody can go and check out the special episode we did with Quarter Past on that one. So, yeah, there's just inherent problems with that machine, and spending a lot of money for a new spokesman is not really going to save it.
Did they include Jello modes? Did they try including Jello modes with that?
I'm going to guess that they probably floated the idea and then decided that buying the rights to Jello and its logos was even more expensive than getting Cosby on board.
Very true. I do want a Jello TI 99 someday.
That would be cool.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go for it.
To change topics a little bit, and well, I guess bring us back on topic. How common were modems in these days too? Because you mentioned the TextNet online service. I'm not super familiar with home. I guess it would obviously be dial-up, but like dial-in computing with these devices.
Well, if you're talking your average kid who gets one of these computers to help with their homework and stuff, they're not common at all. They're
Right.
extremely uncommon. I personally never knew any. I didn't have any friends that owned a modem in the 1980s. So from that standpoint, they're uncommon. If you are, for example, a business person and need to be checking stock quotes and stuff, I mean, we don't have the cable channels with the stock tickers and stuff back then. These services do exist. I mean, AOL is coming up around this time. We've talked about that in the show as well previously. We've talked about how the source is out there. There's like 4 or 5 CompuServe is already out there. There's 4 or 5 of these bigger services that are catering to a certain type of clientele. It costs a fortune. I mean, you're still paying quite a bit of money by the minute, but for the people who can afford it, these are fairly active systems and fairly active services. It's just they're not mainstream because they're just way too expensive.
Sure. I kind of wanted to just put some perspective on, who is using this type of thing at a time. Again, that's something that we absolutely take for granted, but yeah.
Oh, definitely.
Bill Businessman definitely needs access to TextNet and the source to do what he's doing.
And last year, we did highlight a article that was in I believe the New York Times about, the family of the future. And it was a profile of this family in New Jersey where everybody is using the home computer to log on to this online service, but they're using it for very different things. One person's checking news, the other one is playing some little game, the other person is chatting with friends and all this other stuff. So the concept and the functionalities were there. It's just, it really was a sort of the upper echelon of society can afford to do this, and only they can afford to do this.
Sure. And they were certainly helping pave the way for where things would go as users.
Exactly. I mean, they're establishing sort of the business model of, well, what services are people willing to pay money for? Or better said, what services are people willing to pay enough money for to make the investment in the infrastructure worth our while?
Very true. Yeah, I'd love to do a deeper dive through the ages of what just banking technology looked like then. Because we're still ahead from like the Super Nintendo and the Nintendo. Well, Nintendo not so much, but actual modems that plugged into that so people could access their banking in Japan, that sort of thing. It's just that kind of a need, and how it fits in with all of this is interesting to me.
Oh, definitely. And there are a lot of those types of systems happening. How much of them are happening directly from the home computer to where the home computer is talking to the computer someplace else, as opposed to the home computer maybe running a telnet style window or something like that? That's probably more accurate to what was going on back then. But you've got a whole bunch of systems currently running, and there's also a lot of stuff in the news around this time about hackers. Kids at colleges breaking into stuff. This is where the inspiration for the movie War Games, which I believe comes out in '83, is coming from.
Yeah, I was about to say 2 years from now.
Yeah, exactly. You have to remember that movies take a long time to develop. So the incidents that would lead to a movie being released in '83, those are probably things that happened in 79, 80, maybe 81 at the latest, because you're going to need 2 years to go through development to get the movie into theaters.
Exactly. And do the research. Yep. Exactly.
And so it's in the air, this idea of the interconnected world. It's just, number one, the computers are too slow. You don't have enough memory to store the stuff. It's just text data. It's not sexy in that sense. And
Right,
let's face it, there is no internet without porn. And because all of these systems are proprietary systems, and you still are paying by the minute, so it's just there's too many factors playing against it. It's going to be the opening of the internet in the early 90s, the legalization of the open internet in the early 90s, that is going to really change that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
politics certainly hadn't caught up with everything at the time either. Just everything was so fast and new.
exactly. Everything was happening relatively quickly, and also there was a lot of, still the lingering idea, well, what is the internet for? Do we leave this up to the market, or is this thing that we created for the universities and for the military really what we should be focusing on?
Right.
So, okay, and our final CES report, NEC showed off their PC8001A, a Z80-based computer running at 4 megahertz. The machine was a hit in Japan after its original launch in '79, but would have limited success abroad despite having a robust standard version of BASIC. So, yeah, this is another sign, just like with Sharp, Japanese company has a product that is successful in Asia. The Z80 is big in Asia, in Japan, sorry. And unfortunately, it's just not going to be able to take off in North America. It's 79 technology. The Z80 is basically dying. The last big computer in the States that's using it is the TRS-80, but even that's just been replaced, if you will, with the Coco, with the Radio Shack or the Tandy color computer, which is not using a Z80. And yeah, so this is just a machine that it doesn't fulfill any required market niches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm picturing NEC, unfortunately, like skipping over, doing really well in the Japanese market over here and just getting tanked.
Well, and it's not the last time that they will desperately try to get into the CPU-based consumer devices in the States, TurboGrafx, and get their butt handed to them. So we will see NEC try it again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. And so that's CES, and we hinted at it earlier, but some of the players are seeing a big future.
Atari orders chips from Commodore.
Atari is getting the CPUs for their console and computer lines from MOS Technologies, which is owned by Jack Trammell's Commodore. While they created the chip originally, MOS had licensed the design to several other manufacturers, and Atari would later order their supplies from those companies as well. But for now, the $6.2 million order is an added bonus for Jack's plans to bust open the home computer market with the VIC-20. And I did check with Ethan about this beforehand, and he is quite certain that these chips that are being ordered are probably all, if not mostly, ROM chips. And those are the chips that you would need, obviously, for a video game cartridge. So it looks like Atari is gearing up for mass production of cartridges.
All ET. Is that too soon? Literally?
It's too soon. It's too soon, quite literally. But yeah. But they're seeing the writing on the wall. They're putting in the order early, and this is probably going to be chips ready for the Christmas season.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's great news for Commodore. They're making out like bandits.
They're making a lot of money. I mean, the purchase of MOS Technologies was really the most important thing Jack could have ever purchased for Commodore. But yeah, unfortunately, the contracts at the time did not give him profit sharing in all of the license deals that they had. So he did not get a piece of every 6502 based processor that went out there. Otherwise, the Commodore would have been profiting off of every NES that was made. So
Right. Well, at least the money's going somewhere that they have some control over.
Exactly. Oh, well. Okay, so that's what's going on in the chip business, but we have other innovations in the hardware.
Membrane keyboards are vying for dominance.
The newfangled membrane keyboard, which has already taken the world of home appliances and calculators by storm, is now setting its sights on computers. With ultra-thin components, can they truly take on the traditional metal-on-metal typewriter-style keyboards? John?
Is that a rhetorical question?
Sort of. John, what kind of keyboard do you have on your computer?
Ooh, I have a mechanical keyboard.
Make that beautiful sound.
Oh yeah, this is the quiet. This is the quiet business kind. But
it's quiet business kind. What's the point of a mechanical if it's quiet?
For recording podcasts, so you don't have everybody hearing your clicking.
Yeah. Good point.
I do miss those clicky keyboards, but the membrane keyboards, I didn't think about them coming about around this time. It's again another thing that we take for granted right now, but this was the beginning.
Well, I mean, they were necessary for calculators.
Very true.
You couldn't have a pocket calculator without a membrane keyboard. A lot of the microwave ovens around this time are also membrane keyboard, for the number pads and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So this technology is there, and this was an interesting profile in the New York Times because they actually had this cool little diagram showing, how a membrane keyboard works and stuff. And they obviously also say in the article that at this point, people, they expect, that little travel distance on the keys. They expect the tactileness for blind typing, and the reliability isn't there yet. But with computers getting smaller and all this other stuff, and we have the first portable computers because Radio Shack / Tandy just released a portable computer, a tiny little one, and machines like the ZX80 using a membrane keyboard. The air, it's in the air that the day of the mechanical keyboard may be numbered.
The ZX80 using it is a big one for me. I guess from what we've covered so far.
Yeah. It's one of those things where once you have that idea of this cost-cutting measure, the size measure, and just manufacturing a mechanical keyboard with all the keys and everything and putting in the little springs, the amount of extra labor involved is dramatically affecting the price of the unit. And if you can cut that labor cost out, you are going to be able to sell for a slightly lower price, especially when you're producing millions of units.
Exactly, and there might be want for these quieter membrane-style keyboards too, especially for home use.
And that's something that they haven't really considered yet because so far it really wasn't an option.
Oh, that's true.
I mean, the keyboard I have in front of me, this is a membrane keyboard. It doesn't look like a membrane keyboard like a ZX80 one because it's not one flat piece of plastic, but it's a membrane keyboard underneath it all. This is it is the dominant form of keyboard today, and it was kind of cool that they already sort of foresaw it 40 years ago.
Yeah, humble beginnings.
Yeah,
sure.
Exactly. And talking about innovations.
Surge expected at the patent office.
Ronald Reagan has proposed a strengthening of the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office to deal with the expected rise in computer program-related patents. Recent Supreme Court decisions allowing for patents that include software elements and the general rise of computer technology are expected to fuel a growth in patent applications, protections that will be vital to securing the U.S.'s position as a technology leader.
That's a huge one. This is new. This definitely is very new space for for all of these, and it's funny to see what's getting patented today too. It never stopped.
No, it never did. Now, the idea of patenting software has been more limited, or has been limited by court decisions since this time. But at the time, it was very, very broad what you could patent. And because the courts really didn't understand software, they didn't understand the idea of what is just, a general concept in computing. And it was easy to convince them, or relatively easy to convince a judge that, this is a totally new and innovative idea. And you're like, no, it's not. But if the judge buys it, then they get a patent.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this the patent office has grown to a tremendous size today in comparison with back then. And you need all these experts who can actually understand what the hell is in the patents. And because so many patents come in, just checking them is a mechanical process to go through them and so forth. It's just gotten huge.
Yeah, I can imagine. You got to have the infrastructure to deal with the surge, and if it's being recognized by a current president, then it's definitely here to stay.
Exactly. Okay. And our final story is unfortunately not the death of a company, but the birth of something new.
Automated Simulation launches Epic's line.
Automated Simulations, makers of the Dungeon Quest series of computer RPGs, has launched a new line of games that expand on their existing Temple of Apshai engine with action elements. The first title, Star Warrior, moves the engine to a sci-fi scenario and will carry the Epyx, EPYX, branding.
I've heard Temple of Apshai mentioned in passing, more jokingly because it was very early.
Yes, and we've talked about it at considerable length here on the show. And if you go back to the very first episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine, that was November of 2018. So our 40-year jump there was November of 1978. We actually talked about the founding over Thanksgiving of Automated Simulations.
Oh, wow. Man, I need a time machine for that time machine.
Exactly. And this company was basically founded by some D&D geeks. Their first programs, Temple of Apshai and the Dungeon Quest series of games, all used the same basic engine where you moved around a map, fighting bad guys, collecting treasures, blah, blah, blah. And they had built up this system where, you would buy add-on discs for the game. So you constantly have new adventures coming off of this. Now, the original versions for the TRS-80 and the Commodore PET did not have graphics as such. They were basically using ASCII graphics. And so obviously the whole thing is running kind of clunky. They've got a really weird system for moving around the dungeon, but that was appropriate for the time. And the Temple of Apshai series would get basically like what we would today call an HD remake. So there's going to be a Temple of Apshai game on the Commodore 64 that moves the whole thing to a real-time environment and simplifies some of the interactions. Then you're going to have the Temple of Apshai Trilogy, which is going to take 3 of the adventures and redo them again on the 16-bit computers with all new graphics and a different set of commands and a different set of systems. So it's a bit of a legendary RPG series. But more importantly is that the Epyx line is going to become the main name of the company very soon. And here, again, I would point everybody to the interview I did with Michael Katz, because he takes over the company at a certain point, and the last of the founders who was still there essentially gets sort of kicked out of his company because the profits are dropping. He went public. The RPGs he's making are not getting traction the way they should. And Katz is one of the people who pushes the company towards new lines of products. And this is where we get amazing games like Pit Stop. We start getting all of the game series, summer games, winter games, and so forth. And it's just very innovative, interesting product. And it's considered by many to be like the golden age of the C64. So they kind of define that early era of 8-bit gaming on computers.
That's cool that they moved into the sci-fi, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, this is also something that is reflected in what is happening in pen and paper RPGs at the time. Because D&D is huge at this point, and we've mentioned it a few times. I mean, the ads for it in the toy journals are, you can't ignore them. They're huge. The game has just gotten really, really big, and there's a lot of other companies coming out making RPGs as well. And the sci-fi scenarios are quite common at this point. So it feels like a natural fit to take an existing RPG engine and just basically give it a sci-fi coat of paint. Because the game itself doesn't change. The graphics are still rudimentary at best. So making the changes and just rewriting the text to sound sci-fi is not all that difficult.
Makes sense. They just it's cool to see a new coat of paint. That's funny how we were just talking about the original of George Lucas and his kind of bringing that to the center stage. Obviously, This is 10 years from our last jump, but yeah, the timing's still interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely it's this idea of reusing a game engine instead of programming the game from scratch is really the great innovation of automated simulations, and I don't think anybody else had ever done that in commercial product before, in commercial games.
Yeah, we take a lot for granted of what we take a lot for granted of these engines that get created nowadays versus people writing stuff from bare metal way back when. Exactly. And it can't be overstated that if you're going to do something like this, that's cool. Just don't stick with the same engine for too long. Right. Because it's going to bite you. And for example, Surtec learned that lesson the hard way. Although, well, that's another story for another time. Okay. That is it for our jump back to March of 1981. Any closing comments or thoughts, John? I really enjoyed experiencing CES through the 1981 eyes. That really opened that up for me, and I'm certainly slowly but surely brushing up on my computers of the era too. I'm very much familiar with more of the 90s, like really early, late 80s computing options, but I love to learn more, and this was a neat trip down memory lane for that.
Oh, I'm glad you got out of it, and I hope the listeners did too. I mean, it's just the plethora of incompatible platforms all at once is is
just
kind
a smattering.
Yeah, and I didn't even cover all of them. There were a lot more in the reports that I was just like, okay, these are just so historically irrelevant that I have to decide where I'm going to draw the line.
That's fair.
Yeah. So, okay, cool. Then before we go, remember everybody, check out the Retro Game Squad, John's amazing podcast that he does with his two good buddies, Jeff and Alex. And when are you guys going to be recording again? When's the next ep coming out?
Oh, wow. We actually just dropped one barely a week or two ago. So come check us out, retrogamesquad.com, or you can join our conversation at discord.retrogamesquad.com.
Cool.
I'm definitely more.
And it was all about the N64.
It was, yeah. It was our N64 special, so we're a little bit farther ahead in time than what we're covering today. But again, I'm honored that you would ask me to help you out with this. I definitely want to do some more research if we do another one of these, but this was really neat.
Not a problem. I still don't know if Peter's going to be back next week, so who knows? You might be back next week already because he is still swamped at work and cannot find the time to get some recording in. So for us, everybody, remember you can, if you have questions or comments, send us an email at the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine at gmail.com. Or you can contact us over, say Tumblr, that's totally wrong, over Instagram or Twitter. And you can also join our Patreon, where you can get early access to the interview episodes. We just pushed our interview with American McGee onto the standard feed. And we have an interview with Jim Trucano, former president of the AMOA, the Arcade and the Amusement and Music Operators of America president. He talks about how he was the third generation of operators in his family. His grandfather was running jukeboxes during Prohibition and stuff like that. Absolutely amazing interview, different side of the industry. That's up for the Patreon patrons, as well as my two-part interview with co-founder of Acclaim. So we got a lot of stuff going on there. And you can help support the show by, becoming a patron for just as low as $1 a month. Okay, so with that being said, all the plugs are in. John, would you like to say farewell? Or wait, no. We need a word of the episode.
The word of the episode is hacker.
Hacker. Excellent. I'm digging it. We go with hacker. Everybody, have fun.
Thanks.